This is Kanzenshuu, the podcast, episode 489 for the week of August 15th, 2021. Well, hello, welcome back to Kanzenshuu, the podcast, an extension of the all-encompassing Dragon Ball fan site, Kanzenshuu. We cover anything and everything Dragon Ball in hopes of enlightening and a little bit of entertaining. My name is Mike. You may see me around as Vegito EX. Forgive me, Dende, for I have sinned. It has been 4 months since my last podcast episode. I will not make excuses for it. I will simply explain the situation. And that's the explanation. There's been a lot of stuff in the works, though, as is typical for Kanzenshuu. I'm not going to belabor that point. Let's just get on into it. What do we have on tap for you this episode? Because it's a good one. It's a big one. Ian, you may see him around as Cypher. He's joining us for what's kind of a follow-up to his last time on the show back in October, taking a look at all the parties involved in the Dragon Ball Super manga serialization. What's changed, what's stayed the same, etc. And in particular, we will be looking at Toriyama and Toyotarō, the extent to what they do and how they do it. It is a great chat, especially right now with so many little tidbits that have been in VJump, and Toyotarō is in the midst of a 2-part video interview, which we very rarely get, and we're getting some great stuff out of. So Ian and I are going to break all that down for you, have a real great chat looking at everything that we know about how the manga is going, what changed from the TV adjacent arcs going into the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc with Moro, and now into the Granolla, the Survivor arc. But since it has been 4 months since the last podcast episode, I do want to cover, I guess, 3 very significant news stories, and not in any super detail, but if you are just a podcast listener that doesn't go to the website, you may not know that these things have occurred. So let's cover them real quick. Hey, so we're getting a new theatrical film called Dragon Ball Superhero. I don't want to go into too much detail on it right here. This is the kind of thing that even if you're just a podcast listener of Kanzenshuu, you have no doubt seen elsewhere across the internet. We do have an article on the homepage that details all of the major announcements and minutiae associated with this news. So please just go check it out and know that we will, of course, be covering that in the future here on the podcast and, of course, on the website. Everything's already underway for all the contemporary documentation that needs to be done alongside that. So that's one of those, this is major, but stay tuned on it. Remember when Tubi announced that Dr. Slump was going to be coming to their streaming service? Well, the monkey's paw has curled, and we do indeed have Dr. Slump's 1997 reboot television series streaming for free in its entirety on Tubi. That sure is a thing. Just go watch it if you want, and perhaps go read the manga instead. The entirety of the manga is available on Viz's, their $2 Shonen Jump Vault subscription. That may be the recommended way to check out Dr. Slump now and in the past and forever. Everyone likes different things for different reasons. If you want to check out and see in 1997 what the hell we all were looking at after GT going, really? This is, well, okay. You have to experience it for yourself. Probably the most significant news, Shinsuke Kikuchi has passed away. Kikuchi, of course, the composer for the Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z franchises, started Dr. Slump before then, carried over into the Dragon Ball series, worked on all the contemporary movies back during the original serialization. We're going to have to do more on this in the future. What an incredible career, an incredible body of work. Back when Hiromitsuru passed away, we promised a tribute. And it's been a little bit too heartbreaking to really pull something together there. This is something we need to do more and do better in this regard, and I promise we will. I just don't know what shape or how that will come to be. It will probably be a couple old guys and gals sitting around on a podcast exchanging stories. That's kind of the best way I can think to do it, and the most real from our perspective. I think you just need to go watch the series and listen to it, and the way that it brings out that series. Kikuchi's score is something back in 1996 when I discovered Dragon Ball Z that took me from liking this cool show to wanting to devote myself to learning everything about this franchise. That was the thing that opened my eyes and ears to what Dragon Ball truly was, more so than any other aspect of the production of the franchise. Thank you for everything you gave us, and I promise we will do and say more about you and your work in the future. So that being said, let's get on into our topic, which I've already recorded and edited, so it's ready to go. I hope you enjoy Ian and I talking about the Dragon Ball Super manga and how it is being put together and which people are responsible for doing that. Enjoy that topic. I will see you on the flip side of that with a little bullet list of things to check out on Kanzenshuu right now, and that'll be the episode. So enjoy, and I'll see you on the opposite side of this topic. Joining the podcast, in the grander scheme of things, it's actually probably, in terms of like numbers, more recently you've been on the podcast than it would otherwise seem, but by time, it's been a very long time. Joining us live from Japan, it's Ian. Probably see him around as some permutation on Cypher Online. Hello, sir.
Hi, good to be here. Yeah, it's been a minute since I was last on. Doesn't feel like that long ago, but looking at it objectively, it definitely is.
I feel the same way, especially because we're always just all talking all the time. Like I have this weird thing where I've been doing stuff for so long that 3-4 months can go by without a podcast. I'm like, it was yesterday, right? But no.
Sure, totally.
It's been a long time. So there's a new movie. I don't care about the new movie right now. We're going to talk about manga stuff because...
Yeah, let's talk about the manga.
It's contemporary. It's ongoing. It's important. It is kind of like the lifeblood of new Dragon Ball content right now.
It's hip. It's now. I'm always telling people this.
I like talking about the manga with you specifically because not just that you keep up with it, but you are interested in the craft behind it in a way that I don't see a lot of other folks talking about. Now, granted, I have a very self-selected group of people that I followed that talk about Dragon Ball. So who knows, what else is out there? Who could say what other people exist talking about Dragon Ball online? I kind of want to start at the beginning with some of the key players, and then we can kind of like go through I actually don't know how we want to go through this. We're going to see. So let's start at that top. Akira Toriyama, you may have heard of this man before.
I have, yeah. I think he wrote a little series called The Doctor Slump, and then just a one-hit wonder, really.
Went nowhere. Maybe a couple one-shots over the time. So he's the original author. We've talked about credits, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about credits as we get into this discussion. Gensaku, original work, Akira Toriyama. Toriyama is not exclusively responsible for the Dragon Ball Super manga, the official continuation of the series, but he's certainly involved in it, and that's something that we will talk about with regard to the last two arcs, the last completed arc and the ongoing new arc, and then the rest of the arcs before then. But that takes us to Toyotarō, who is solely responsible for the final art that you see on the page, with the exception of maybe some corrections from Toriyama, but even then, Toyotarō is still the one submitting the work there. And we'll get into more about him in a little bit, which kind of leaves us with two other people that are also very important to the Dragon Ball Super manga. And if you've been listening to the podcast and following the website for a while, you've certainly heard these names before. Akio Iyoku is probably at the top of the food chain here. He's the editor-in-chief of V-Jump. V-Jump is the monthly publication where Dragon Ball Super is serialized in Japan. And in addition to that, he is the head of the Dragon Ball Room, which is like this multi-departmental consortium of guiding Dragon Ball's future that we heard a lot about early on and then nothing about within recent time, I feel like. Does that sum up Iyoku pretty well?
I think that's correct. Yeah, I think moving into some of I think the next person we're going to talk about, maybe it's important to clarify that what Iyoku does is he handles the entire franchise of Dragon Ball.
Sure.
So that includes the movies, the manga, multimedia projects. He's sort of the head person for that.
Right. He's probably the one putting the final signature on things after getting whatever other approvals he needs to get, if any, at that point. But let's talk about number 4. So that's Victory Uchida. That's a name.
That's what he's called. Yeah. every place he's credited, every place he appears, he goes by his pen name, stage name, kind of functions as both, Victory Uchida.
And we've had this in the past. I'm actually blanking on his name right now, but he was like the 90s version of this in V-Jump with the video games.
Yes, and they have several now. It's not just Victory Uchida. All of their full-time magazine staff tend to have these alternate public relations personalities, mascot personalities that they embody for their appearances in the pages of the magazine and in online videos and conferences.
Doesn't Iyoku as well? Isn't he like King something?
I believe so. I can't speak to that with authority right now, but yeah, I almost everyone who's involved in the production of the magazine has a character that they play.
So Uchida, what is he? Who is he? Well, he's Toyotaro's editor on the series. We've certainly talked about editors over the years, most specifically with Kazuhiko Toriyama, who was Toriyama's first editor. He's the one who discovered Toriyama, really, and the one who continued to reject him until he came up with something good. The role that Toriyama played with Toriyama is very different from the role that Uchida plays with Toyotarō, and that's is for a combination of reasons. It's, well, what magazine they're published in is probably one of the biggest ones, but the state of reality of what Dragon Ball Super is compared to the original series. And let's talk about V-Jump a little bit, because it's changed over the years. When V-Jump first started, it was the promo magazine. It was, here's a bunch of games. Here's manga that's not real manga. Here's manga that's showing our games. One of the first manga series in V-Jump in its early promotional issues before they kind of started working on what the real format was it was a Cardass series where here's Dragon Ball cards, and this kid named Bui is playing this in a big stadium. That's what V-Jump was early on, and that's what it continued to be for a long time. Tell me about some of the series that have been in and are in V-Jump now, and how that's changed.
Sure. Well, there was actually a thread on Twitter just, I think, last week of some of the mostly 90s, some early 2000s covers for V-Jump that Toriyama had done. Mm-hmm. And it was really striking looking back on them, because everything that was on the cover and everything that was advertised on the cover, with very, very few exceptions, was game related. And a lot of the time it was a game based on a Jump property, so a game based on Dragon Ball, but it was still very much video games at the center. There was a little bit on there for the Dr. Slump revival, but even that, in the cover artwork, it was Dr. Slump characters mimicking Dragon Quest covers. It was all game related.
I love those. Arale dressed up as Dragon Quest characters. Arale dressed up as Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. Like, this is how they were promoting stuff.
Right. It was very much a game magazine with some manga in it and some promotion of other Jump properties and Jump related multimedia projects. But that was its identity. So a lot of the manga that ran in it back in the day were things that were game related. Although earlier on, it had something it doesn't really have now, which was, in addition to all of this game coverage that made up the bulk of it, from what I can tell, it would also occasionally have little original manga by some of the big names who had left Weekly Jump. So some of Toriyama's later one-shots would run in there. That's really changed on both fronts. So it's shifted away from being primarily a game magazine. I think one of the reasons is probably that game magazines just don't really exist in the same way anymore, or can't, because everything is online. You can't put cheat codes, you can't put guides in a magazine, you can't sell it on that. So they do still cover games. They do coverage, pre-release coverage of a lot of the Jump-related video games.
Yeah, that's usually the first quarter of the magazine. Like, here's the 2 pages on the Dragon Ball game. Here's a spread on the Naruto game. Here's the JoJo stuff coming out. And then you'll get some manga, and then some more games in the middle.
Yeah. Well, the way it's organized now is almost like, this is, I guess, getting a little bit ahead to what manga are running in it. But they have Dragon Ball Super. They have Boruto, who you may know as the son of Naruto. They have 2 Yu-Gi-Oh manga, which has been a thing for a while. I think they had 3 at one point. They have a Dragon Quest Dai prequel. They have the Dragon Quest X spin-off manga, which has been running for forever. And then they have a couple of other small little game-related things. But really, it's become sort of the place where Weekly Shonen Jump sequels and spin-offs go. And that's now the bulk of the magazine. And even the game coverage now is sort of formatted around those manga. So all of the Dragon Ball game coverage, the gacha game coverage, the figure coverage, it all goes before or after the Super manga. And that's the Dragon Ball, like, fifth of the magazine that month. All of the Naruto coverage goes on either side of Boruto. All of the Yu-Gi-Oh coverage, that's the other niche this magazine has, by the way. It's the only place that Yu-Gi-Oh, like, OCG, TCG coverage can run. So that was its selling point for a while, I think, after the game coverage died out, is it was the only place to get news about Yu-Gi-Oh for people who played it. But all of that coverage goes on either side of one of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga that is running in it. And then the same thing now for Dai and Dragon Quest related coverage. So it's become formatted around the manga, and the manga, I think, have really become one of the two selling points. So the game coverage has now become sort of incidental, and it's selling itself on Jump sequel and spin-off manga. Most of them also have anime tie-ins. Some of those series have ended on TV and continue in the magazine. That's pretty regular. Maybe some of those anime will return to TV one day. Maybe they won't. I imagine some Yu-Gi-Oh! GX fans were waiting for years for that one to return while it was running in V-Jump. That didn't happen. So yeah, it's really structured around the manga, and then its other selling point now is freebies, because they do pack in cards for Dragon Ball Heroes, Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been killing me with V-Jump. There have been a couple months where you just can't buy the magazine.
Yeah, if you ever can't buy the magazine, it's because there was a good Yu-Gi-Oh! Card in it. But even the Dragon Quest now has a Dragon Ball Heroes equivalent card arcade game, so they'll do pack-ins for that. So those are the two selling points now. It is now sequel spin-off fiction, and that is its selling point, and the promotions. But that's a really, really big shift from what it started as, which was mostly game coverage, little bit of manga. That's really reversed over the years.
And if you can't tell, we're talking from a perspective of a couple of people who actually regularly consume this magazine. That's something I love about Kanzenshuu, is we make it a point to begrudgingly purchase all of the things we're talking about. So I buy it for a historical perspective, but you're reading the Yu-Gi-Oh!
There is something wrong with me, because I buy this magazine and I genuinely read, well, for a while, just one of the series, and now like 2.5 of them. And for this, I pay more than the price of a full volume of collected manga in Japan each month.
So, no, you're getting the real deal perspective here from folks who don't want to buy it, but do.
Yeah, if I had another way to read Super.
So I guess let's get back to Iyoku and Uchida a little bit in terms of what V-Jump is now. So we have Iyoku, again, editor-in-chief of the magazine. You can probably understand all the jobs and responsibilities that encompass a role like that. He's overseeing everything. Uchida is Toyotaro's editor on Dragon Ball Super. And you and I on the podcast here have talked, there's been an interview in the past that you kindly translated where Uchida talked about his role with regard to being in the room with Toriyama and Toyotarō, and how much his perspective is weighed in comparison to those. And that's very different from what Torishima's role was over top Toriyama, where Torishima actually kind of did have the final say. And Toriyama would fight that by not delivering his manuscript until, an hour before it was due. So that's how he would get around some things. But Torishima was the boss, as much as there could be a boss on something like that. Not so much that way these days, it seems, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Every interview we get with Torishima, which is a gem, everything he says is fantastic, really, really puts him in sort of the top role. He is really, Toriyama's boss during the original run when he's the editor, and he does step off at a certain point, but still maintains a lot of personal influence with Toriyama. And this is the opposite. One, we should probably clarify, we talked a lot about what runs in V-Jump, but we should maybe be a little bit more clear. It's not like a real manga magazine. It's very much like my metaphor for it, for like a medium and market that I think people outside of Japan will understand more, is the content that runs in V-Jump, the fiction that runs in it. These are the direct to video sequels of the manga industry. Very, very different.
I know people probably don't want to think of Dragon Ball Super, I'm dating myself here, as the return of Jafar of Dragon Ball, but
I think enough people will get that. That works. It is. It totally is. And I say that as someone who enjoys it. I have a lot of good things to say about it, but that's the context. And that's the context you have to look at it with. And I think you can look at it that way and still get something out of it. But that's, for a realistic perspective of the series, it and everything else in V-Jump, these are the direct-to-video sequels.
Right. Like, yeah, it's Dragon Ball. Of course it's Dragon. It's the real Dragon Ball. But it's not the original real Dragon Ball.
Right. And that's fair. And, no studio is going to... They're not investing in the next... in making their next big blockbuster project, Dragon Ball manga, right? It had its day, and now people still like it, but this is where it goes. This is where the continuation goes. And that's fair, I think. But
right. My Hero Academia is not in V-Jump.
Right.
Boruto is now in V-Jump. It was actually originally in Weekly Shonen Jump, not running weekly, and then got moved to V-Jump, which, what was your take on that? Was that an attempt to kind of bolster V-Jump or kind of make V-Jump into what it has become?
I don't know if I can speak to authority with that because I don't follow Weekly Jump and its sales enough, and I don't follow Naruto as a franchise at all. But yeah, I mean, it seems consistent with sort of what the identity of both magazines are, which is Weekly Jump is their big flagship title. They want new series in it. They want new hits in it. And they want that space for things that are going to fulfill that role. So having a monthly sequel series running in it really feels like, maybe it was an experiment, but that feels like from the get-go that was something that would be up V-Jump's alley. And maybe the transition was sort of part of V-Jump rebranding into what it is now, which is sort of sequel fiction first, game coverage second. But I can't say for sure. Yeah, just to get that out of the way, right? That's what V-Jump is. So when we look at the roles of the editors, they fall in line with that, right? Torishima's goal was to be the hit maker, the hit finder for the flagship weekly magazine. And Victory Uchida's role is to help
be a mascot.
Be a mascot, an ambassador, someone who is helping these continuations and spin-offs continue successfully and
right
without rocking the boat. And he's there to sort of facilitate between these superstar legendary Weekly Jump authors like Toriyama, who have sort of had their day and are now having their sequel series drawn by assistants and former fans. And he's there to make that process work and to do some promotion. And that's his role with some creative input.
I see him as kind of like a project manager more than like a direct editor.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's obviously, he has some creative role. We know that he will pitch ideas. And actually, some of the other collected V-Jump manga over the years have talked more about their editor roles. So I recently read through several Yu-Gi-Oh! Sequels, which were enlightening as far as Super, actually. Because a lot of their backup comics show the workflow between the artists and the writers and the editor.
Oh, nice.
And the editors, they do have creative input. So they'll make suggestions like, hey, this would be a fun, popular idea. Or they'll have the three sitting down together and they'll all be pitching with each other. But yeah, it is much more of a project managerial role. And they're facilitating the manga as part of a multimedia initiative at some points. So they're the ones who are responsible for being aware of that bigger picture. And the artist and writer, if those roles exist, are the ones who are focusing solely on the creative aspect. So Victory Uchida lays out his relationship here is Toriyama's power level is 100 million, Toyotaro's is 10 million, and then he's at negative 100, is the way he puts it.
That kind of takes us into now that we're 20 minutes into setting up the conversation, what the conversation is about. And that is the roles of all these people and the creative craft, who's responsible for what and why and how. An updated version of what we've talked about in the past, because we did talk about it a bit getting into the Moro arc, the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc of Dragon Ball Super, which was the first new post-television series manga original arc. So Toyotarō was the one putting it out, and sure, there were all these other roles. So let's do a little bit of a look back on Dragon Ball Super and the way that some of these folks have contributed, and how that's definitely changed and morphed over the years. So Dragon Ball Super was announced as a television series, and then, oh, by the way, we're doing a manga. And Battle of Gods arc sure happened in the manga. Resurrection F did not. We've talked about all these for various reasons. The Dragon Ball Super manga really came into its own in the Future Trunks arc, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would be a little bit more generous because I really like the U6 arc in the manga. So I
think it's fine. I like it.
Yeah, but what happened in the Future Trunks arc, and I think why a lot of people will say, oh, that's why where it came into its own, is because that's when it got its big page count increase. It was like 15 to 20 pages per chapter up through the end of Universe 6, and then it jumped up to 40 plus pages in the Future Trunks arc. And you can really see Toyotarō struggle with that for a little bit, but he does find his footing. But yeah, that's where it hits that massive increase.
And so they talked about the Goku Black arc and how they were working on things in the past. Volume 4, the back of the book interview on there, we have a translation on the site. It's officially translated in Viz's collected releases as well later on. There's some stuff in there. Is there anything you want to pull out of like this era of the Toyotarō production?
Yeah, well, let's build up to what the question that we're looking at here is, which is, I guess, what the hell is happening with the Granolla arc? And who is doing what in the series now? And how is that different or the same as it's ever been, Dragon Ball Super as a whole? And I think what people are mostly interested in is what is Toriyama's role? What is Toyotaro's role at this point? How much is Toriyama? People like to play that game. And I also like to play that game a little bit because we get drippings of it. We get enough to guess, but not a lot of concrete statements. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at here. So all of the key word that we're going to be looking at for a lot of this is, you said it earlier, gensaku, which is, it has a couple of different meanings. It means original work, like the original work that all of these spin-off and sequel manga are based on. Right,
and the example I always like to bring up is Dragon Ball GT. Toriyama gets credit with the original work on Dragon Ball GT. It's not that he made Dragon Ball GT, it's that Toriyama is responsible for the Dragon Ball franchise. That's what's being credited there.
Yes. So that gensaku word, it appears on some of the non-super Dragon Ball spin-off manga too. So things like the Yamcha reincarnation manga, SD, Super Dragon Ball Heroes. Those all get the gensaku credit. And Toriyama also gets the gensaku credit on Dragon Ball Super. And then there's another word that we have to keep an eye out for, which is genon, which is original draft. And that is the word that they bring out when we talk about like drafts or outlines that come from Toriyama for a lot of the Super arcs. That's something that a lot of fans like to talk about. Right, what was in the Toriyama draft, the Toriyama outline. And the word for that in Japanese is genon. So when we have the first new TV content, Universe 6, and it's also adapted in the manga, we get, genon, Toriyama. He's done the draft.
Right, we knew that before Dragon Ball Super even began. I feel like actually even before we knew they were going to do recap arcs, we knew, I'm setting up this new thing. They're visiting their Universe 6 and who knows what's going to happen. I've come up with this new story.
Yep, absolutely. So in the volume 4 of the manga, so they talk more about Toyotarō receiving this draft, this genon, this outline from Toriyama, right? And everyone was sort of on board with that being the workflow, right? The Toei, the anime studio would get this draft. Toyotarō would also get the draft, and they would do their independent interpretations of it with oversight from Toriyama.
This is the classic bar napkin joke.
Yeah. People joke about it being a napkin with bullet points, and we'll maybe get into some of the reasons that people joke about that a little bit later. In this interview in Volume 4, we have, I think, what was the first sign to a lot of people that Toyotarō maybe had more creative input at a higher level than just how he interpreted the outline for the manga. So I think the key part here is Toyotarō talks about the original plan for Zamasu, for fused Zamasu, sort of the final boss of the arc. And he mentions that in the original draft from Toriyama, fused Zamasu was apparently not that strong. Super Saiyan Blue, Goku and Vegeta alone were capable of more or less keeping up with him. Toyotarō really wanted to meet fan expectations and have Super Saiyan Blue Vegito show up as another fusion. And so he had the idea he mentions a couple of things. He mentions wanting to include Vegito, and then also using the idea of the Potara time limit as a key element along with that. That also happened in the anime, in the TV series. So it's not quite clear if they both reached the idea of including Vegito independently, if at an earlier stage during the ideation process, Toyotarō pitched this, Toriyama accepted it, and then that went over to Toei, so they included it too. We don't really know, but this opens the idea that it's not just a done deal once Toriyama sends out his drafts to these two different parties.
Sure.
There's more ideation, and Toyotarō is part of that ideation and part of that back and forth. So I think that's the big takeaway from the Volume 4 interview that was not known or maybe not expected beforehand.
We have to talk about the universe survival arc for quite a few reasons. This really feels like we've talked about the Dragon Ball Super television series kind of melting on screen in many cases early on, but it also felt like this arc was another example of production kind of falling apart and changes being made last second, some of which we've certainly discussed on the show before. But there was an interview in March 2018 on the official Dragon Ball site. It was at the artisans who made the universe survival arc. There was a lot of really good nitty-gritty information in here. And this is on the heels of, speaking to what Toyotarō is responsible for, he was getting credit on screen in the anime too, because he contributed character designs. Like, his role is seriously elevated in terms of visibility there.
Yeah. We got full releases of all of the original designs for the Gods of Destruction, and I think more than half of them were credited to Toyotarō, including some major ones. Vermood is...
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like, and he feels like one of the main characters of the arc.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had a big role there, and we see the anime being maybe more willing to adapt some of the manga's ideas in that arc as well. I know a lot of people like to point out Super Saiyan God returns, and there's a little bit of switching between God and Blue, which was a beat in the manga and the Future Trunks arc. I don't know how substantial that is. That could just be that episode's writer liking that idea.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely on a production level, big elevated role, lots of design work. And I guess we can get into this interview. So the March 2018 interview with the anime staff, which is maybe, I think this is one of my favorite interviews for behind the scenes Dragon Ball Super content ever.
I totally agree.
God,
and I think it helps that it's not Toriyama or Toyotarō. It's just these folks who worked on the series. Like
these poor men.
I don't know if they're just more open.
You really feel sympathetic toward them because it really feels like you can just sense them trying their best to work with what they have, and they are too far. They're getting ahead of themselves. Production was such a rush. You get the sense that they're really not getting the most complete workable ideas from Toriyama at this point. So I think a lot of the napkin draft jokes, which are unfair, I should say. Like I don't think that Toriyama is being that irresponsible, but you really sense that they're struggling to go into production with the level of input they have at this point, for many reasons. So the thing I want to look at here, again, we're kind of getting at what has Toriyama been responsible for at different points? What influence have other parties had at different points?
Right, and that's why I feel like we're repeating ourselves a little bit over time on the podcast, but this is important to recap before we get to the current
we're building
arc.
up to the new content, so we need to reestablish this a little bit. So they mentioned in the same terminology, Toriyama sent them a draft for the arc. It had the idea for the Tournament of Power, 80 competitors fighting all in a jumble, and it had some of the initial designs. So likely the Pride Troopers and some of the other major incidental characters they got designs for. Notably, they did not get any input on Jiren's personality. So they initially sort of drafted or pitched him as a very talkative, superheroic character. And then they got feedback from Toriyama afterward that no, he's actually a strong silent type. So they had to change that late enough that he appeared in the exhibition match in like some stills for it. And they switched that to Topo.
It was the trailer. Yeah.
By the time the arc aired.
Jiren there.
So they were really, really scrambling to sort of adjust as new ideas came in here. So there was back and forth after he sent the draft, I think is the takeaway here. He sent the initial pitch, the initial outline, and then he sent clarifications about Jiren's personality. And then they also mentioned they sent the design for Kale because they wanted a Broly equivalent character. So they pitched Kale, and then Toriyama pitched Cauliflaw in response. And in the final arc, in both versions, in the TV and the manga, Cauliflaw and Kale are pretty major characters. They're a pretty major sort of like mid-boss, middle arc, a middle act character together as Kefla. So that's a big portion of the arc that was not obviously outlined at the start and sort of evolved through talks with probably both Toei and Toyotarō. So again, there we have another glimpse of it's not just he sends the drafts out and he's done. These ideas are evolving over talks with different parties at different points.
I just think, especially in retrospect, it's crazy to go back to this point in time and see them do Broly and then turn around and do Broly.
Yeah, that is very strange. And from what we know, there was a lot of overlap between the Broly film and production of this arc. So,
right.
There's a lot to dig into with the relationship between Kale and Broly production wise and what happened there. But
maybe that takes us to this interview with Akio Iyoku in April 2018. I'll just read the English translation here. First, around the spring of 2017, we presented Toriyama sensei with several different story suggestions for the new movie. I believe there were also suggestions that weren't in his strike zone at all, but using what we threw his way as a reference, we got him to come up with the story. So not just the fact that they're overlapping Broly here. What's important here is that they're presenting information and ideas to Toriyama. There's a couple things I want to dig into here. One is that they presented multiple ideas to him to come back with for feedback or a final decision. And this is actually, I think, back to the Future Trunks arc. When we first got the information about that arc, one of Toriyama's comments was that that arc's idea was pitched to him. So there have been points along the way where it wasn't Toriyama in a bubble coming up with story ideas here.
Yeah, absolutely. We have two, I guess, different scenarios to look at. So the myth of Super is that Toriyama goes into the mountains and sequesters himself, and he writes a draft, his outline, right. And no one has any influence on him, and he sends it to Toei and Toyotarō, and they adapt it. And we know that's not true, and it's sort of not true in two different ways. So one, we have what we just talked about with Vegito and elements of the Tournament of Power, right. Where it evolved during, right? There were talks during, and different people were pitching ideas that made it into the final version. And the other is what happened with, the origin of Goku Black and the Broly, the film, where someone from Shueisha pitched a premise to him first. And then he took that basic idea, right? An evil Goku or adapting Broly. And then he went and he did his own script or draft based on that. But yeah, we have two different things that have happened here. So these evolving stories during different talks with Toyotarō or Toei, and being pitched an idea from someone else and then doing his own sort of outline or script based on that. And that is probably not so different from how the original series would have worked too, thinking about Torishima's role.
Sure.
Right? We have talks from Torishima about the origin of Piccolo Daimyo, right? Where that was sort of an editorial suggestion to move into a more serious villain-focused story, right? And of course, that was maybe a more fluid creative process with the two of them. And it wasn't sort of a pitch from a different outside party, and it wasn't part of a multimedia project. But
right.
As far as looking at what's different, what's the same here with within Super itself or between Super and the original run, the stories that wind up in Super, although Toriyama is taking the final sort of creative pass at what shape they'll take, definitely different ideas coming to him from all of the other sources involved.
I feel like that takes us to the end of Dragon Ball Super in its first form, which was the end of the Universe Survival arc, and into the Broly movie as well. And this is where things maybe started to change in a few ways, because then we get into the Galactic Patrol prisoner arc of the manga. We have quite a few things from Toyotarō. We have a comment from December 2018 V-Jump when he's introducing the arc. We have an amazing interview. You translated this one, right? From when Volume 11 was coming out. His workplace interview where he shows off like his little models that he was making.
Yep. Yeah. The 2018 V-Jump comment and then that Volume 11 interview, I think they tell us, I think, most of the information about how the arc came into place that we have. So yeah, something is different here. So although we've talked about all of the previous arcs and the movie, right, they had outside ideative influence. It wasn't all Toriyama. One thing that was consistent was we always had this Geon. We always had this, there is a draft. There is an outline. Mm-hmm. If it was a movie, it was the script.
Sure.
Was from Toriyama. And that is different for the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc, the Moro arc, and it is different for this arc alone. Let's look at this 2018 V-Jump comment.
Yeah. Let me read the whole thing. There's a couple things. It's just like, okay, whatever. And then you get to the end of it, you're like, whoa, wait, what did you just say? So here's what he says. We have finally entered a new chapter. And by chapter, it's like literal chapter, but also next story arc. It is a completely new work that is not in the anime or anywhere else. Unlike Jocko, this Merusu guy in the first chapter is a genuine elite member of the Galactic Patrol. Just how strong is he really? Why has he come to Earth? And who is this criminal that he says has escaped? With the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc, I'm teaming up with Toriyama-sensei and getting a lot of praise as I make it. I'm hoping to make it an enjoyable story that will thrill you all, so please look forward to it. The booklet includes a reprint of the arc opening in chapter 42. So there's a little supplemental booklet included there. Wow, there's a lot of interesting words in that last half there.
Yeah, I think it's more interesting what word is not in there, which is we don't have that word for draft, for outline. And that's the first time for any super storyline or movie where we haven't had something like that mentioned. And instead we get, I'm teaming up with Toriyama-sensei and getting a lot of praise as I make it. Which is very, very different. I think if you were really, really plugged into the behind-the-scenes Dragon Ball Super content when this arc started, that was really telling. And I think that was really something to dig into because they were always so big on pushing that draft, that outline from Toriyama. And to go into a new storyline and specifically not mention that in its opening press was pretty remarkable. And so I think a lot of people saw that, and there were basically two reactions to this if you were sort of in the fandom following this at the time. One, you had people who I think, I don't want to show my bias here, but I think this was the more reasonable approach, and I think I'm very biased that this is the correct way to interpret this. I have no horse in this race, but this is the right way to take this. Probably this meant that it was mostly a Toyotarō helmed, in an ideative sense, a mostly Toyotarō directed and outlined arc. But, of course, Toriyama would still be there giving input and supervision. And I think that mostly bears out through later content we'll look at. That was probably what happened here. The other way that people took this was Toriyama is just done. He's gone. This is all Toyotarō. He's sending his drafts for a nominal check, but this is just him. And Toriyama has quit Super now. That was the other way people took this. And I guess the third way people took this was they just didn't see this at all because they weren't that plugged into the fandom because they're normal, reasonable people. And as far as they knew, the series there was no change, right? It was still same credits in Japanese, Gensaku Toriyama, manga Toyotarō, same credits in English, which are very confusing and misleading in Viz's version where it says written by Toriyama. It's not written by Toriyama. That's very clear from any of the interviews and any of the material. It's scripted by Toyotarō and drawn by him, but that credit never changed. So still had Toriyama's name in a pretty prominent creative position. So if you weren't plugged in at all, you just thought, well, nothing has changed. But clearly something had. Very, very, I think, obvious at this point that Toyotaro's creative role is at least much higher than it was before. Which I guess brings us into that workstation, that workplace interview with Toyotarō that came out before Volume 11, where we have a little bit of clarification as to what the creative process was, maybe a little bit more fuel for the fire for different readings of that previous statement.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, the really key things we find out here are that Toyotarō designed the main characters. He designed Moro, he designed Merusu, or Maris in Viz's version. He had, of course, designed some major characters for the Universal Survival arc, but not the main ones. Toriyama still did Jiren. He still did the primary antagonist. He did the other major Pride Trooper characters. This is the first time that Toyotarō has taken the big characters and all of them for the arc.
You know, I actually wanted to bring up around this time, it's kind of important because this is like the Toyotarō prop-up time. At the same time that this is going on, Super Dragon Ball Heroes World Mission is hitting on Nintendo Switch and PC. And the final villain of that game, Shirasu, very notably and heavily promoted as designed by Toyotarō, effectively also based on Victory Mission, which Toyotarō drew.
Yeah. That was, that is strange when you think about it. This was really the first time that had ever happened. They used Toyotaro's name as a selling point for that game, for a major... Heroes is a major multimedia pillar of Dragon Ball now, however you feel about it. So yeah, that big... the home port of that game, and that was, I think, the Dragon Ball game for that year or month or week or however often they come out. Yeah, and it wasn't, here's something Toriyama did. It was, here's something Toyotarō, the author artist of the sequel manga in V-Jump. This is something he did. That's a pretty striking amount of prominence for someone in his role in general, and I guess for him personally compared to anything that had happened prior. Yeah, that's right. We got Shirasu, the handsome man, Toyotaro's quest to design the handsome character, which he mentions in several of his design notes on Shirasu and Maris. But yeah, we find out that he designed the main characters for this arc, but we also find out that one of the new characters' secrets, quote unquote, which everyone has interpreted, I think, pretty reasonably as being Maris's backstory. Right. He credits that to Toriyama. So we also know that it isn't just Toriyama loosely supervising. He was also involved in some of the key ideas, the key creative components of this arc. So sure. I think putting that interview together with the prior statement, I think a reasonable picture of what happened with that arc was there was no Toriyama draft, which there had always been in the past. It was Toriyama and Toyotarō having story meetings and pitches with each other, and then Toyotarō taking the helm on how the final story was shaped and sort of how it went chapter to chapter, which is different from what it had been previously, but I think maybe not so different. There was probably no Toriyama draft, which is, a substantial departure, but it's not as if there weren't back and forths on an ideative level in previous arcs with different parties. So a little bit different, a little bit the same. I think it's fair to call that Toyotaro's arc in a way that none of the other ones in Super so far have been, but it's not... Toriyama's involvement in it is different, but maybe not so radically different from what it was in other parts of Super. We actually have some more hints as to what happened in that arc from recent interviews as well. So I guess maybe we can jump ahead to talking about the Granolla arc, and I guess this was kind of our big question. What's up with the Granolla arc, and what is up with the creative involvement from Toriyama and Toyotarō in Super, the manga, right now? Who's responsible for what? And the Granolla arc, and how is that different or the same from what has come before?
Where we start here is probably what you and I talked about on the podcast most recently when you were on, was this October 2020 interview on the official V-Jump YouTube channel where Victory Uchida comes on and is talking about what's going on with the manga. And we got some really interesting tidbits out of there. This is where we got the comparison of the battle powers between them, which is very cute. What about this do you, again, want to pull out to kind of set the stage for where we're going next?
Yeah, so I think, again, if you were following the behind-the-scenes content really closely, you kind of had the impression that the previous arc, the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc, had been Toyotarō-led, Toriyama-influenced, maybe, compared to what had been the reverse before. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were kind of expecting that to just continue for at least one more arc. And this interview really did nothing to disabuse anyone of that notion, and it really kind of provided more basis for that. So in this interview, he describes, for the first time this has ever been described, as far as I'm aware, in any of the behind-the-scenes content, he talks about story ideation meetings, right? Story sort of pitch meetings between himself, Toyotarō, and Toriyama, where they're narrowing down general ideas for the next storyline. And he talks about having multiple ones at that point and sort of hoping to narrow it down to 3, talking about spending more time narrowing down ideas here than they had previously, which does hint that similar meetings were happening previously. To what extent they were happening during the anime adjacent arcs, we don't really know, but they probably were happening. Maybe that's, maybe that's where Vegito was pitched. But yeah, he talks about having these sort of, what is the next plot line? And the people involved are himself, Toriyama, and Toyotarō. So just the V-Jump manga crew. So that is maybe different from what had been happening prior. But yeah, at this point, we know they're meeting. We know that Toriyama is still involved. We don't know how big Toyotarō or Toriyama's sort of stamp on the final arc is going to be at this point. But I think a lot of people were expecting it would be the same as the previous arc had been. So mostly Toyotarō sort of in the the driver's seat. But yeah, that's what we get out of that meeting. So we know that the three of them talk and are pitching with each other at a very basic ideative level at this point.
So where we go next in terms of like reference material are a couple little side columns in V-Jump. But I feel like the questions were raised before we got any of this. What were we seeing on the page? What were we feeling while reading this arc that was kind of raising some eyebrows? Was there anything where we're like, wait, is this the same as what was happening before?
Well, I think every time you get a new arc of Super, especially now, it's only happened twice, but I think we can already draw a pattern. People are curious as to how involved is Toriyama, how involved is Toyotarō, how involved is anyone who has a creative role to play in Dragon Ball. So yeah, I mean, obviously you already have that speculation. A lot of people thought that Granolla was designed by Toriyama, just looking at him. He's a little Dragon Questy. That turned out to not be the case, but just the designs of the new arc were fueling speculation. On the other hand, the fact that there was big narrative connective threads to the Moro arc. You had 7-3, the android who had appeared in that arc, playing a major role in the setup of this one. So did that mean it was still sort of Toyotarō taking the lead? What did that mean, if anything? So yeah, just a lot of speculation based on how the arc started out.
All right, so let's get into this column. This was in the February 2021 V-Jump, which came out in December 2020. So it's fairly old, I guess, at this point. It's not just a side column. It's like literally the side of a larger page where they going through some of the fights in the series. But it's a couple questions with Toyotarō. The first two were kind of like softballs. What'd you think about the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc? Who's your favorite character? Oh, I love Marusu. Then we get the final question. Here's that word again. We get a Toriyama draft.
Yeah, yep. So Genon appears, the word for draft and outline. This blows my mind. This was probably of anything. There's so much weird stuff with super behind the scenes revelations and content. This is one of the weirdest ones to me because they had always taken a big forum to announce that they had a new Toriyama draft, a new Toriyama storyline, right? That was what they were selling all of these new TV storylines on. And now it appears after being absent last arc. They wouldn't say it last arc. And here it appears not in any sort of big conference, no big announcement, no big press. It's just in a teeny tiny little sidebar interview next to their standard like series recap promotional pages after a chapter. And it's tucked in teeny tiny text in the answer to this last question on this page, where Toyotarō says, "We've spent more time on this story than ever before, and I was able to receive a really great draft from Toriyama because of it." And that's so crazy. So we get in the same language we've always had before, we find out there is a Toriyama draft, a Toriyama outline for this arc, but it's not promoted in any big way. So when I saw this, because I'd been following all of this, my thought was, okay, well, what happened here? It might just be a matter of not having a TV series anymore, so there's no sort of big promotion for it in general.
Yeah, maybe Toriyama has more time? What? Maybe?
Yeah, well, when I read this was my idle speculation when I hit this, and I don't think this is necessarily true now, because we've gotten more. But when I saw this, I based on what had come prior, I thought, okay, well, probably Toyotarō is still mostly taking the lead on this, but they had story meetings together. And then maybe for a little bit of extra hyper promotion, they said, okay, now that we've all hashed this out, Toriyama sensei, would you write the final draft for us so that we can say you did it?
Sure.
And that wouldn't necessarily be creatively that different from what had happened at any previous point, but I thought maybe that was kind of the flow here. And we find out that was not the case. But yeah, it was a very unusual wording. It was the same wording they'd used to promote the big TV arcs that had come from Toriyama, but revealed in a very, very low-key way, which I thought maybe signaled some sort of different, some creative shift. I think there might be, we'll get into, there is some shift, and we'll get into what that is, I guess.
I will say we don't actually have this formally archived on the site, so we'll have to do it. It's 3 questions, so hopefully I can throw this at someone, whether it's you or I can give it to someone else.
Sure.
But I'd love to get that up there. We actually go to the very next month in V-Jump. So this is the March 2021 V-Jump, released in January 2021. And if I'm looking, that was actually when Super Chapter 68 came out. So the arc is like truly getting going at this point. That's Granolla, the Survivor, Chapter 68. What do you want to tell us about this? This is also like we were talking about with V-Jump earlier, where everything kind of is built around the manga chapter. So before Dragon Ball Super, you get like 20 pages of glossy full color. Here's a video game. Here's the gacha. Here are the figures. Then you get the Super Chapter. And then immediately after the Super Chapter, you usually get a page of, here's the upcoming volume, by the way, also by Dragon Ball SD. You can probably get that somewhere. Super Dragon Ball Heroes by Nakayama stuff. And occasionally you'll get some extra little columns, like the previous issue had the fights and then the side column with the questions. This next issue had a similar thing where they're recapping what volume's coming out. And then we get some Q&As with Toyotarō again.
Yeah, so we get more revelations about who did what in this storyline. I think the most immediate one is we find out that Toyotarō designed Granolla. And I think some people had already caught on because the sort of full character art for him was very much in Toyotaro's style. But yeah, he's very explicit here that he designed the character. So we now know that, and that's similar to how the previous arc had gone. And then there's reiteration about Toriyama having sort of organized this story or done a draft for it. So we get those two revelations here, and I think kind of just left a lot more people confused than anything about sort of what exactly this arc was. If it's a Toriyama draft, why did he not design the characters? Who did what? How involved is anyone in anything? What is Dragon Ball? Who is Granolla? What is Granolla? We just didn't know. But yeah, we did know that Toyotarō had designed the characters at least, and Toriyama was apparently responsible for the story draft.
Anything else to pull out here? It's relatively short. It's
that was pretty minor. I think, yeah, the big revelation was the character design.
Well, that takes us to the present. I mean, the arc has just been ongoing this entire time. We're talking about all this behind the scenes stuff, but every month there's a new chapter. So we're a few chapters in at this point. So August 2021, we get the first of, there's going to be a follow-up to this. So we might even have a follow-up to this conversation. Toyotarō is doing video interviews regarding Dragon Ball Super and V-Jump and serialization and production here. He very rarely does this kind of stuff, but we got Toyotarō on screen answering questions.
Yeah, I guess one thing to note is we talked about this earlier where they used his design to sort of sell the Dragon Ball Heroes home port. Toyotaro's visibility for a V-Jump artist is pretty remarkably high. I don't think anyone else is really used to sell their aspects of their franchise like he is. So that's kind of interesting, just in general.
They brought him to America a couple of years ago. He was at Comic-Con.
Yeah. I mean, that's just like, none of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Sequel artists are like getting that kind of press, right? It doesn't happen for that artist in that magazine, right? It's very much sort of a work for hire position. And I think probably contractually it is for him too. But
sure,
his sort of overall presence in the greater multimedia franchise that he's helming the sequel manga for is pretty remarkably high compared to what usually happens. So yeah, he's doing promotional interviews on the official Dragon Ball site now, and we get a lot of revelations about how this arc came into being in this one. Everything that was a question mark before is kind of answered at this point. Toyotarō was kind of doing the initial pitch. He was sort of sifting through different ideas that he had. He wanted to do a story about someone with a sort of a grudge against the Saiyans. So he and Victory Uchida worked out some of the initial character details, basic story details. They then passed that along to Toriyama, and instead of just giving some like pointers and feedback, so what Toyotarō was expecting was just guidance, and instead Toriyama does sort of a whole story draft.
And that's par for the course for Toriyama. And when we think back to, it really starts here in 2013 with Battle of Gods, where Toriyama comes in and scraps, I don't want to assign a percentage, but a significant amount of that film, rewrites character motivations, redesigns characters, effectively rewrites the entire dialogue for the film. And a similar thing happens with Resurrection F, where we knew from the start it was going to be a Toriyama script, but he delivered an entire script for the movie. He comes in and he does this. He's asked to do something and he kind of delivers more than they ask for.
Yeah, and I think that is positive. I think some people would be tempted to read that as being a little mean or dismissive to, I guess in F, that's fine because he was just doing more than he was asked, but rewriting a Battle of Gods script that already apparently existed, or I guess you could maybe expect Toyotarō to be taken aback at having sort of his initial pitch just fleshed out into something largely different. But he at least says that he was happy to have received that and moved by it as a fan, which I genuinely believe.
I believe too. And we get it from two sides here, because we have Toriyama, who's within the last decade really gone on record of like, I'm the author. I have an idea of who these characters are in a way that only the author can truly know. And he says that, and I don't read arrogance in that. I read reality.
Yeah,
it's his story. He is the person who made these characters.
Yep.
And I think Toyotarō is truly taking that to heart in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had the opportunity to pitch a Dragon Ball storyline and Toriyama took it and rewrote it based on those ideas into something he wanted to do, I would be like ecstatic. I think that would be great, right? Because that is Dragon Ball. It's his world. It's his story in style and sort of substance. So yeah, so that's apparently what happened. So, and like you noted, it's very similar to what has happened in previous Dragon Ball projects in the revival era. And I think it speaks kind of positively to Toriyama as well. I know a lot of people are tempted to read him as just sort of wanting to wash his hands of the series because he isn't drawing the manga. He turned in apparently overly Spartan outlines for previous drafts. Who knows how and why? I think a lot of people maybe read too far into the Universal Survival Arc interview where they talk about the shifting Jiren personality. The anime was way, way too far ahead production-wise, so maybe it just like shouldn't have been going that fast. Who knows why that happened?
Right.
But yeah, he's obviously still very passionate about these characters and about the world, and I think if an idea or a pitch excites him, I think he's genuinely enthused to go ahead and write a storyline that still entertains him personally and that he thinks will be fun. And yeah, it looks like that's what he did here. Yeah, so what is different about this and what is the same? It is still a Toyotarō idea. So in that way, it is similar to the previous storyline, the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc. And in that way, also different from all of the TV adjacent arcs. But in some ways, it's similar to the TV adjacent arcs in that Toriyama did do an outline, but it was based on someone else's pitch, right? That's pretty similar to Goku Black. That's similar to how the Broly movie came into being. So some similarities and differences there as far as comparisons to previous storylines. And specifically, we learned that Toriyama added the heaters in the Viz version, which are a pretty substantial part of the storyline so far. So obviously he really sort of redid this from the ground up and put his spin on it, but kept the core seeds of what Toyotarō has suggested. So we get some specifics on what was added from Toriyama, what came from Toyotarō. But I think as far as the big level, who's doing what picture, we now know it was a pitch from Toyotarō. A pretty detailed one, and then taken of Toriyama's own accord, according to everyone, into a full-on draft, which is somewhat similar to what some of the previous storylines have been.
I want to pick two pieces out of here to go over with you. One, you actually, as you were tweeting through it, you made a little note yourself that Toyotarō had been expecting to get kind of just like yeses and nos in terms of direction on elements. And you had a good question. Was this an indication of how the Moro arc went, where he really was in the driver's seat and just getting more yeses or nos as he went? And that's not what happened here.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to touch on that as I was talking, actually. Yeah. So this is the final sort of puzzle piece of figuring out what was happening with the Moro arc. Yeah, I don't see any other way to read that. I think if he was expecting to just get guidance on his idea this time, that's saying without saying that was how the previous storyline had worked creatively. And that matches up with everything we know, right? Toriyama suggesting character pieces, details, like probably suggesting Merusa's backstory, but Toyotarō sort of being in the driver's seat as far as the shape of the story and what was happening month to month. So yeah, I think by noting that didn't happen here, yes, I think that's kind of the final confirmation that is how the previous storyline had worked.
This kind of goes back to a prior point we were just talking about, where it's Toriyama's world and Toyotarō is just playing in it. And minor spoilers, I guess, if you're not catching up with it. But there's maybe I won't totally spoil it, but there's some objects that Toyotarō notes by name that like, well, I don't feel like I can do that. That's something Toriyama would have to do. I feel like that kind of backs up what we were talking about before, where Toriyama is still like, this is my world. And he doesn't feel comfortable doing that without Toriyama.
Sure. I have some, I guess, different feelings on that. So one, I think as far as answering a question of how involved is Toriyama with Dragon Ball Super as a whole, or just with regards to the manga at this point, I think the answer is still pretty heavily involved, right? He's the one choosing to add these major new lore additions to it, right? So he's still very much there. He drafted this arc. He's putting pretty major new ideas into it. So yeah, we have that. And then my other sort of personal feelings on that are, aside of the whole who's doing what question, my feeling was just, man, I wish Toyotarō did feel emboldened enough to make those kinds of pitches on his own. If he is the one who's actually scripting and drawing this comic. And Super, for me, I like it because it feels of a piece with Dragon Ball to me, mostly like tonally and character-wise. That's why I enjoy it as a sequel. It's very much the direct-to-video sequel, so that it has that sort of context for it. But yeah, although it feels of a piece with the world, it is also its own thing. It's a separate sequel series, and Toyotarō is the one authoring it. So I wish that he would sort of feel like he could kind of go bigger on these pitches. And if Toriyama rejects them, he rejects them, and that's fine. But like, man, just go add some new stuff. Like feel emboldened to do that, please. I think that would probably just lead to more Dragon Ball overall, because it's always been pretty freewheeling.
I feel like that's something Toriyama said, whether it was the volume 1 or 2 or 4 interview, where he kind of gave Toyotarō free rein, like, please go do stuff. I want to see it. And Toyotarō was like, oh no,
yeah,
okay, thank you.
And I think that's the thing too. I guess we talked a little bit about Toriyama obviously still being enthused about the series. I think people the reason people have some doubts about that is because, well, he's not drawing the manga, and he's just giving sort of loose outlines for people to flesh out. And I think the thing is, like, he drew weekly manga for like 15 plus years. I think he just doesn't ever want to do that again. I think he's still very excited about creating in this world. I think he's still genuinely passionate about, but like, is more than happy to have someone else draw the serialized comic for him, as long as they do a decent job. And I think in that regard, he's also happy to push Toyotarō into more of a creative role. And it's not because he wants to wash his hands of it. I think it's because he's happy to have someone else actually helming the manga, and in that case would be happy to see them put more of their own ideas into it.
Yeah. To that point about just how involved is he how many revisions did the Hitas get?
Oh yeah.
And Toyotarō said after the third rejection, he's like, can you please just design them then?
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he did a couple of the minor characters in this arc. He designed the Sugarians, who look much like many of his other cute alien designs. He designed Monaito, the new Namekian. Yeah, and then rejected the Hitas 3 or 4 times. And he's always, a lot of the spots where there's a new major character, we get the backup pages in the collected volumes that show his revisions.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, just so like volume 16, I think it is, just came out. And that's where we got the aliens and Monaito. That's where we got Toriyama did.
Oh, we find out that Toyotarō drew the Hitas as well. So he's, again, drawing most of the main characters for this arc, but Toriyama is being picky about them. Yeah, and we have his revision of Jiren's debut scene. Generally, when there's a new character, I think characters that Toriyama is really passionate about when they first appear in the manga, he tends to draw them directly. He redrew Zamasu in his debut scene too. So yeah, he's obviously pretty passionate about what goes into the page without wanting to actually ever draw a long serialized manga himself again, which I think is fair.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a broken record on several points. Like, I get to my old age, like, here are the 5 things I want to talk about. And one of them is, y'all, Toriyama was a household name and like one of the richest manga authors before Dragon Ball began. I don't think people quite understand just how popular Dr. Slump was in Japan. Yeah, like, that was a big deal.
Iconic.
And the fact that he ended up doing a 10-year stint on another series after that is, I mean, who else does that? Rumiko Takahashi, who's the Yu Yu Hakusho Hunter x Hunter guy? Togashi, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can count them on one hand who are the folks that have the 3 or 4 major series like this. Well, he doesn't need to do manga anymore.
No, he doesn't. I guess to bring this all back around, I don't know how much of this will stay in because we've kind of gotten around the point, but how different is the Granolla arc from anything that came before? A little, and in many ways not, because it's never been the mythical Toriyama goes into Zamasu and Black's cabin in the woods and he no one talks to him and he produces his raft. It's never been that. It was at one point Toyotarō more in the driver's seat, it looks like, last arc, and in some ways this arc appears to be more of a mix, a slightly different workflow. So the answer is it's always changing. It's never just been one thing. Different people have had their hands in the pot at different points, but Toriyama has always been fairly, or sort of at a very prominent level, creatively involved, having final say-sos, and he's definitely not left the building in any sense, whether that be
right
at any point in the anime or the manga or the movies. So I think that's about where things land.
And we're going to get a part 2 of this interview, the video interview with Toyotarō. That's coming, is it next week? Couple weeks? I forget when the second date was, but
I have absolutely no idea, but it's coming. It's coming. That's a threat. It's definitely going to come out.
That's the production of Dragon Ball Super as it relates to the manga, we think. I mean, there's a lot of asterisks in there. But like we said a couple times along the way, like there are some things where they explicitly say things. There's a couple times they say things without using the exact words, but okay, that definitely means X then if you said Y. Again, it is this Twilight sequel series. They're going to promote Toriyama as much as they can, but curiously, they've stopped doing that. Like the fact that he did write the draft for this and that was the sideline column kind of thing. Dragon Ball Super's just always been so weird. And I think any scrap we get is just always enlightening.
Yeah, that is very strange. No matter how I look at it now, the promotion of this arc is a little unusual. And it might just be that, hey, Dragon Ball Super is just a V-Jump manga right now. It's got a new movie coming out eventually, but the promotion for series without currently airing anime is just different in general. So I think we're seeing some of that too. And Toyotarō is almost a name that they can promote on his own at this point too, which is also very strange. Like that's been a slow development. Very unusual for a V-Jump artist. Someone please collect Victory Mission. You can sell it on his name alone right now. Put out a tankobon. I'll buy it. Release it in America. Everyone buy it.
Should have come out alongside World Mission. Like they had
my God.
Silver platter right there.
It's such an overlooked opportunity. But yeah, who knows what'll happen with Dragon Ball Super at this point.
Who can say? Ian, thank you so much. I always love these chats. Dragon Ball's so much fun. It's so weird. It's so fun. This is the way I like to consume Dragon Ball now. We're just going to sit back and go, is that what they're doing?
Yeah, that's the Super experience. I feel like we very slowly walked toward loosely summarizing something that could have been like 5 bullet points, but it tends not to be. And I guess there are a lot more question marks than that. And people are confused and curious about how Super comes into being. So it's worth talking about.
Right.
Also, public appeal, Viz, please change the credit from written by Toriyama on the English release, because I see people confused about that all the time. He doesn't script it. If you're listening to this and you're under that impression, Toriyama does not script the dialogue in the Dragon Ball Super manga. That's very, very clear.
Co-signed on that. All right, that's going to bring our topic to a close. I haven't recorded the rest of the episode. I have no idea what's coming next. It may be the end of the episode. We may talk about other things. Again, who can say? But Ian, thank you very much. And you were going through a little voice actor interview. I think we're going to toss that up on the site too.
Oh yeah. There was a little on a Japanese TV program. Jake Kerms let me know that it had gone up online. But it's region locked. So yeah, we got a little chat between the voice actors of Frieza, Piccolo, and Raditz and Pilaf. Raditz and Pilaf are the same actor. So yeah, they talked a little bit about interactions with Masako Nozawa and their brief encounters with Toriyama, and a little bit about how Ryusei Nakao envisions his Frieza voice. So somewhat interesting tidbits if you are into the voice side of the Dragon Ball TV series.
I would have introduced that as the voices of Tambourine, General Blue, and Pilaf.
Yeah, I should have thought about that. I didn't know about General Blue. I used to know that and I forgot. I'm not as big on the TV series trivia.
Well, I'll say thank you for the third time, and that's the end of this segment.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks, as always, to Ian for everything that he does. We did mention a few things that either are like half translated or will be translated. I don't have them up live on the site right now to go alongside this podcast episode, but hopefully shortly that stuff will be coming, so stay tuned for that. In terms of things to check out right now, well, Shueisha is kicking off this 40th anniversary super gallery. They're starting with Masashi Kishimoto of Naruto fame. This is, it's on the back of Psycho Jump. It's the back cover. I'm curious if they're going to go through with this, because that's like prime advertising real estate on that magazine. They'll stick with the back cover of Psycho Jump for the full run of things. But they are having famous artists reproduce the original 42 tankobon covers from Dragon Ball in these artist-owned styles. Very cool. Kishimoto's kicking it off. You may think, wait, it's 2021. The 40th anniversary isn't until 2024. But hey, they're starting early. They have 42 covers to get through, so that'll take them a little bit of time. So check that out. We have that on the homepage of the site. I have a scan of the actual back of Psycho Jump, but then Shueisha also released like the clean version of Kishimoto's artwork for free, so you can check everything out. We translated Kishimoto's comment as well, which falls very much in line with what he said back when the Kanzenbon were coming out starting in 2003, and every other volume they had a little pamphlet with artists that drew their own take on things. He's a fan of a certain character, and he backed it up here again in 2021. So check it all out. We are, of course, keeping up with Toyotaro's monthly Toyotarō Druid column on the official Dragon Ball website. He's been going with this Afterlife tournament theme for a while with a bunch of different characters there. And I'm curious if he was concluding it here, because the main character he drew was Paikuhan, who's kind of like the main character of that arc. And then he drew a bunch of other characters in the background. So I'm curious to see what he will draw for his August image, if there's anyone left that he didn't get there. That is something that goes up in conjunction basically with the release of V-Jump every month, so you should be looking forward to that this week. I put up 2 new things in the press archive on Kanzenshuu. If you don't know what the press archive is, you probably know what our translations archive is. It's a massive archive of things that we have translated from magazines, articles, interviews. All of those are the original Japanese sources. The press archive, I like to say, is like the sibling to that, or cousin in many ways. It is the non-Japanese sources. It is Dragon Ball in the press, in the media, primarily the North American English language media right now. I do have a bunch of other stuff I'd like to get to in the future, but that's what I'm focusing on right now, because that's what I have the majority of. 2 things from 1995 that I have recently posted there. One is from a magazine called Internal Correspondence. It's a trade magazine. Internal Correspondence, IC. You may see a website out there called ICV2 that does pop culture media news. This is where it originated. So this is their April 1995 issue, which is announcing the forthcoming syndication broadcast of Dragon Ball from Funimation. And what I love about this, they're not just talking about that, but they're also noting Viz is in negotiations for the manga. That's 3 years before it actually came out, starting in March 1998. Here in their April 1995 issue. I just love being able to track all that stuff back. In addition to that, also from 95, a little bit later in August 95, an article from Newsweek hyping up the broadcast of both Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon for that broadcast season. And they're, of course, framing it alongside Akira, as things tended to be done back then. New wiki things that you may not have seen. The front page of the wiki is live right now. I actually didn't realize that it was not live for anyone other than the editors, but it's live there now, and it lists all of the live preview pages. Therese has a bunch of Dragon Ball Heroes adjacent material for you to check out, mostly the promo anime stuff, list of episodes, but also Mori's music catalog. There's just amazing stuff. Please go check it out. And that's an indication of everything you have coming to you on that project. I will link all of these things I just mentioned in the show notes. And by show notes, I mean the post that accompanies this podcast episode on the website known as Kanzenshuu, www.kanzenshuu.com. That is the website that you're listening to right now, the podcast for Kanzenshuu. And I think that's where I'll leave it, because it has been a full episode. I'm going to edit all of this right now and get posting this episode this morning. Let's see, it's Monday, it's 9:15 a.m. I'm curious to see when this podcast episode gets released. I do actually have to work today, so we'll see how and if and when this all comes out. So thank you, everyone. Check out the website. Look forward to additional materials coming your way, translation-wise on the website, podcast-wise here in the feed. That's it. I have been Mike. Thank you again to Ian and, of course, all the rest of the Kanzenshuu folks. We will talk to you next time. Later.